I guess we'll start like 1 minute early since the rest of you were 15 minutes early. Or 15 minutes late, I'm not sure which. But we're gonna start by agreeing on how to pronounce her name.
Oh,
Just because if we all are talking about her, we want to say her last name the same way. So I'm going to say that it's Vey, because her brother was a famous mathematician, and I know his last name was Vey.
Perfect.
That's maybe not the most eloquent reason to know the last name, but that's the last name. So it's pronounced like Vey, but you'll hear people say everything that sounds German, Jewish, or French, and they'll have really good reasons because of Rebecca. So let's start with prayer. This is very philosophical, so I think we should pray in Hail Mary. Praying to our Lady Seat of Wisdom. So do it pause on your screen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Hail Seat of Wisdom. Pray for us. So, I do want to make sure to talk a little bit about each of the Benedictine habits of mind. I think that they all are a little bit present in here, some more than others. So we'll get to those, but first let's talk about just, when we read this, what things struck us as being deep and we're contemplating. There's some hard things in here. There's some easy things in here that make you feel uncomfortable because they're right, and maybe we rush our work sometimes. So, is there anything anybody wants to just kind of jump on first to kind of talk about that one little passage? And while you're thinking about that, I guess I'll just point out a couple of things that put it into perspective. So, did you feel like there was a lot of talk about geometry in there? We're back to math a lot, right? So, Amy had a really close relationship with mathematics. That's why she used math as an example. She wanted to be a mathematician, but she felt like she was kind of in her brother's shadow as a really prominent, well-known mathematician. And also, it was a really bad time for a woman to be in that kind of an academic endeavor, right? So she made it as a philosopher, but she was sort of worried that she wouldn't be taken seriously as a mathematician. So that's just something that she really liked. So this is not about math. So every time she says geometry, and she talks about this hard thing to think about, I think to kind of put it into your own perspective, you should think of the thing that you love the most, and something that's hard about that, right? Would you want to rush that thing, or would you not want to rush that thing? What can you get if you don't rush that? And also, she mentions early on in the beginning, I'm going to read this part. School children and students who love God should never say, for my part, I like mathematics, I like French, I like Greek. They should all learn to like these subjects because all of them develop that faculty of attention which directed towards God. It's the very substance of prayer. So I should point out the French part. We should all think of that as English because she was French born. So she's not saying, you shouldn't focus on I like mathematics, or I like English and grammar and vocab, or I like Greek. That's the foreign language in the list. She's saying you should really try to force yourself to like all these things. So I hope that puts kind of a new perspective on this. If you didn't know that already, that she's certainly not saying you have to go find the hardest thing, right? Like geometry's the hardest thing she can come up with. It's not that you have to find the hardest thing. You have to find the thing that will make you sit and kind of focus and not rush and do something that makes you, in the end, you'll be able to appreciate it. Yeah.
Would that lead someone to say, well, if I have a favorite subject, does that mean my love for God is deficient?
If you have a favorite subject,
yeah, it says students who love God should not say.
So, right. So I think that she addresses that in a roundabout way towards the very end. In my opinion, that's addressed a little bit on page 64. Mm-hmm. So this is a little bit of an analogy to match it up with your question, but she says, happy are those who pass their adolescence and youth in developing this power of attention. No doubt they are no nearer to goodness than the brothers working in fields and factories. They are near in a different way. Peasants and workmen possess a nearness to God of incomparable savor, which is found in the depths of poverty and the absence of social consideration, and in the endurance of long drawn-out sufferings. And then she goes on, I'm going to paraphrase at the end, she kind of goes on to say that if you are studying this thing that you choose to study, and you ignore this opportunity to struggle with the hard parts of it, then you wasted your chance to grow to God academically while these people who aren't studying things are growing to God in other ways. So you just throw that away. That's my opinion. Does anybody else sort of have do you want to ask the question again, maybe open it up to everyone?
No, so just somebody reading that could say, does that mean my love for God is deficient if I say I have a favorite subject?
Right.
And what she's saying is, in a way, your favorite subject should be the toughest one, because it's the one that you have to, that's best for you to form the habit of attention. Like your worst event, or your worst rotation in a workout, whatever, it's probably the one that's toughest for you, the one that's overcoming it is going to be the more long-lasting formative activity.
Did others kind of pick that up in the reading? That you should, at least, maybe the one that's the hardest isn't your favorite, but that's the one you should be working on. That's the one that does the most good. Any other kind of, before I focus on these things, I just want to see if there are any passages that spark your curiosity that we could talk about.
Well,
You have
I was going to say, I didn't know who she was, so I looked it up. She only lived for 34 years.
Right.
A French philosopher, a mystic, and political activist. Albert Camus said that she's the greatest spirit of all time, which is pretty high praise for coming from him. But
right.
The one thing I found amazing in her bio is that despite her academic credentials, she actually worked in the French auto factory to see how the other side lived.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the attention that you develop within yourself is the critical thing that all of us should be working on. Not just what you're good at, or you have a famous brother, I'm only so-so in math, but what is the French auto worker good at? And how is their life, contributing to the glory of God?
So you think probably she knew what she was writing about in that part where she says that the workers through their suffering are growing.
Oh, she actually did.
She did.
She
chose to do it.
She did that with them.
And she was born into a family that was higher class than that, I think. So, yeah. So she definitely knew what she was talking about. Did you get to the part about how she died?
No, I know she only lived for 34 years, but I didn't say how she died.
So does anybody know how she died? I don't know enough about the bio to be sure I have all these facts checked, but somebody had told me that she died because she did a hunger strike. It was solidarity with people who were suffering. She did a hunger strike, and she did it for so long that when her hunger strike ended, she couldn't keep food down. So, but you can fact check that later, because it seems like you're really impressed with her as a person. I was too. It is good to know where she's coming from. So she's very much a philosopher, and she was not sort of writing just from the point of view of this was a letter to a Catholic priest who ran a school. She wasn't writing from the point of view of somebody who just thought, Catholic schools are doing everything right, you got to reaffirm what you're doing, because she actually wasn't even Catholic. But she had this close friendship with that priest. So anyway.
But she also attacks the idea that, I think a lot of our students, they look for that A, and who cares if I learn anything, as long as I earn an A. My parents are happy, grade point average is good, but if I didn't learn anything, that's not important. But she says, hey, good marks, good success.
Did you highlight that passage?
Yeah, that whole down page 59, where she says, without improving your natural abilities and tastes, and again, developing this habit of attention. So if you don't grow and learn, the grade that you receive is almost immaterial. It's the last paragraph, or second to last paragraph on page 59.
Yeah. Students must therefore work without any wish to gain good marks, to pass examinations to win school success without any reference to their natural abilities and tastes.
And then she talks about the 2 conditions you have to have if you want to be successful doing this.
Did you want to read that to some of your students this time of the semester? maybe not pick on them.
I mean, I would,
No, the one that I wanted to read was, because I have sadly graduating senior who is like imploding, but and I thought it was interesting because I know in languages and probably in math, you know, where I'm not good at languages, I'm not good at math, and the part is on page 62 where she says, all wrong translations, all absurdities in geometry problems, all clumsiness of style, and all faulty connection of ideas and compositions and essays, all such things are due to the fact that thought has seized upon some idea too hastily, and thus being prematurely blocked is not open to the truth. And just that, I've always wanted to be too active and just slow down and be methodical and focused, and you know, and the same thing with languages, and it ties in with what you were saying about, you know, the challenge of the struggle, right? Mm-hmm. You could, if you want to reference Camus, you could say the beauty is in the struggle, right? And the myth of Sisyphus. But yeah, that telling them to slow down and focus on that challenge, you know, and that it doesn't just fall in their laps, right. You know. I find a strong connection between students who say they aren't good at languages and who also don't do any of the work in languages, you know, mm-hmm. even though it's been repeatedly suggested to them what they should do. So.
And so do you also have with French students, then you have students coming in and saying, I spent 15 hours this week studying and I just didn't get anywhere.
Yeah, I'm like, what were you doing? What were you doing when you were studying? Yes. Yeah. They miraculously spent 15 hours studying, but not doing their actual homework or meeting with the tutor or any of the specific things that we suggested they can do.
right, I have a little bit that point on the bottom of 61 where she says 20 minutes of concentrated, untired attention is infinitely better than 3 hours of the kind of frowning application that leads us to say with a sense of duty done, I have worked well. Which is counterintuitive, because you'd expect her to say 3 hours, after which you say, gosh, you know, I'm not getting this. No, you're actually happy after that 3 hours, but it hasn't been used well.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, people that talk about, oh, pulled an all-nighter, I don't ever think that's a good idea, other than for a paper.
Okay.
If you began the night with an idea.
Right. For students to clock in. Okay.
The top of page 60 where he's talking about, she's talking about there is a great temptation to do the opposite, to try to glance at the corrective exercises if it is bad, and to hide it forthwith. Repeatedly, when you're trying to teach students how to improve their writing in composition class, you give them feedback, and oftentimes at a certain point in the semester, I'll even write in the feedback, if you're actually reading this, please send me an email, and I'll write them an email as a compliance check, and I get no emails from them saying, I've read your feedback. Which tells you that if they're not going to read the feedback that you're giving them, and at a certain point I'll tell them, hey everybody, why don't you get out your past papers and take a look and read my comments, and I'll make them read it. And they're very chagrined, but the point would be, if you're not going to read the feedback, you're not going to improve. You have to keep looking at it and learning from your mistakes, or else. But this idea that they do just look at the grade and move on.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn from both what you do right, you have to learn from what you're not doing right.
I'm curious, are you ever tempted when you do that and they don't email you, or are you tempted to not give that person feedback the next time?
Just put a grade on it.
Yeah.
Just put a grade on it.
I mean, I've said to the students, after that comment, if I don't receive an email from you, I will cease to give you feedback.
Oh, okay. That's all.
It's a time saver.
Yeah, you know, how do we get them to see? I mean, this is really hard not to descend into a gripe session at this point.
Well, so can I pause that and let you get right back into it? So if it becomes a gripe session, let's make it a productive gripe session.
Yes.
So which one of these are we griping about? Are we griping about these?
Persistence.
Persistence? Probably persistence.
a little bit of balance.
Yeah, I would say.
But getting them to, I mean, just getting them to connect with what we offer them, I mean, the feedback, and I mean, they just, we give them so many opportunities. We tell them exactly what to do and they just don't. So I'm just wondering.
So I think there's this idea that's valued by Benedictines that I think, in this case, the students need to work on that. So it's very valid. We tell these students over and over how to fix things, and they don't listen. It goes in one ear out the other. And one kind of balance that we really want to be thinking about is balancing action with contemplation. And I think that theme shows up a lot in this reading that we have. And I think that you're right that a lot of students don't know how to balance that. They don't know to balance it. And so I guess we have to make sure that comes up when we do this week. At the end of the semester, when they know what grades they're getting that aren't good, they're going to be really receptive to this, hopefully. So I think that's one of the things in here. And I think that you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, so speaking to that, on page 62, there's a sentence near the bottom. We do not obtain the most precious gifts by going in search of them, but by waiting for them. Which I don't know that I 100% agree with that thought, but it is talking to this action versus contemplation.
Mm-hmm. We do not obtain the most precious gifts by going in search of them, but by waiting for them.
Well, it's because I think they think understanding is some sort of a muscle. That's why she talks about the frowning effort. Like just go, that somehow, this concept is going to enter in. Very often it's allowing the time looking at something the other way, redoing the problem, crumpling it all up and redoing it, that the aha moment comes, that kind of thing. I think that's the thing that she means. Really can't be forced, because that's when you need to know when to disengage from study, right? And I think that going over some habits of the last couple of weeks, talking about reflection, you have to take a moment, just like St. Ignatius in prayer says, stand before the kneeler and says, who am I going to talk to, why am I doing this, whatever, before you do that before you study, right? Why did I take this class? Mm-hmm. What did I want out of it? I tell them, this is not by law, right? You don't have to do this, right? You chose this. So either choose something else or be consistent with your choice. And that's where I see it on the persistence, because where's the follow through? And I think that sometimes the first week of class, I think that they fail to have a goal for the class. My goal for this class is going to be this, and they could be classes where they, on purpose, are going to concentrate less on, and that might be okay. The only reason I want to gain a passing familiarity with this particular thing is I was kind of interested in it, right? I might not major, but I'm gonna try, something like this. That's not my major. And if I get a C, that's okay, right? Because I was not, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? But at the same time, anything that's difficult for you will form the habit of attention.
I want to get back to Heidi's waiting, because when you wait for something that you desire, it's a very attentive waiting. So attention, there's attention there. Attention, A-T-T, not attention. There's attention, and she talks about desire a lot, right? And so that whole aspect of desire I found very attractive throughout all of this, because there are a couple of points I have quibbles with the way she states things. For example, God comes to those who desire, and so on. God's always there for us, and it doesn't come to us if we desire. It's up to us to, as we desire God's love and attention, to open the door to God. And that's the hardest thing we can do in our life sometimes, is to open that door. But I think opening that door what she's trying to say is, once you get used to opening that door to the other, to the geometry, to the literature and so on, you get used to opening that door. You're used to opening doors. And so you can open the door to God more easily because you have that habit of attention to what may be needed, right? And so it's when you do Lectio Divina, you read part of Scripture and so on, and then you just sit and wait. But you're waiting for your soul somehow to grapple with what you've read and find on its own, the meaning for you in that moment, in that time. So that's obviously attentive reading, and your attention brought to it by the fact that you made time for this, then you read this, and then you read. So anyway, I just want to throw that.
So, since we're continuing on that thread, do you think I can file this in one of the columns? Do you think this is attached to one of these ideas?
Well, the one, I was just talking about the action versus contemplation.
Okay, yeah, so we're still definitely,
Yeah.
okay, so we're seeing some more of that sort of.
And it doesn't really fit under persistence, right? Because the word in a sentence has so many connotations that she would disagree with, I think, kind of the wrong head. I have to do this no matter what, I'm gonna put in 3 hours, and that's what we think of as persistence all too often, right?
Right.
Whereas this attention.
So she calls it effort.
So I would say,
She calls it effort.
Yeah.
And let's ask, so I guess at some
so
point we
instead
will
of
figure out.
persistence, I would just put attentive waiting or something.
Right, so this good thing she's talking about is over here, and at some point we should figure out if what she called effort is what we're calling persistence. We hope they're not the same thing, because she's saying it's not such a good thing.
But I think all too often it is in our culture.
Right. So, yeah, Eddie?
I think fundamentally, it's because we have this idea that it's our job to wrap reality into our own categories. Instead of, and I think that's what creates the tension, right? Since I want to understand this, I want this to go my way, then I tense up, right? Whereas the mind has to conform to reality. So the idea of the soul being the passive element, right? And I see it also as an analog to a commitment to service. You can't go out there and say, drag an unwilling homeless person, right? Somewhere where they don't want to go, right? It's a question of offering opportunity, right?
Meeting them where they are.
Yes, meeting them where they are, waiting to be asked, right? Creating the occasion for the need to be manifested. And I think that's also something that she's saying here with regard to study. I mean, the series of essays that Rick has the book there is waiting for God as opposed to waiting for Godot, in the sense of that there will be an answer to this desire. And I think that very often students, and I think it's something that students who think that they are challenged and students who think that they shouldn't be share the same difficulty here. That there's an impatience in both of them.
Well, and then it's about them.
Yeah.
And what you were saying about conforming to something, right? That's part of this attention. There's a book that a lot of this reading kind of tangentially with the idea of attention relates to, which is Matthew Crawford's The World Beyond Your Head. He's a contemporary philosopher. And he has a PhD in philosophy from, I think, Chicago. But he left academia to repair motorcycles. And he's written a couple of books. And they're very much from a disenchanted point of view. And the second one, I think the subtitle has something to do with distraction or something like that. But the point is that you are what you attend to. And so that if you want to be an individual, you have to attend to something that individuates you from everyone else. And it can't be yourself. if all you're attending to is yourself, there's nothing to become in that. And so you have to somehow attend to something beyond yourself in order to shape yourself into the thing that fits up against that other thing. And so I think that fits with what Vey is saying here about like sort of fitting yourself to God, right? Attending to God in a way that when that door is there, you can open it because you've gotten good at opening doors. And so what Crawford would say is that there is nobility in effort, in these things that she's sort of deriding of the hard labor and the things that maybe are not, in her view, as noble as intellectual pursuits. Because in Crawford's viewpoint, those are things in which you are forced to confront a reality that you have no control over. And so he often uses his motorcycle, like if he's fixing a carburetor, he's got to figure out what's wrong with that carburetor. He can't just say, I'm going to do this and you're going to work, right? That might not be why that carburetor is broken. So anyways, if you aren't familiar with him, I'd encourage you. He's got the first book, I don't even remember the name of it right now, it was really good as well. The second one's been out for a few years.
So I don't necessarily think she's deriding that at all. Otherwise, her choice to go work in a factory wouldn't make much sense.
That's why I put the question mark.
Right. I think that she needs to, there's no way around the fact that you have to engage with the matter at hand when you're working the field. In other words, it's more immediate. Now, she says, if we look at the occupations in themselves, studies are nearer to God because of the attention which is in their soul. Because study is more of a spiritual activity per se, rather than material activity. I think she sees almost more nobility in the other because of the fact that you can't get around it, right? And an incomparable savor, right, which is found in the depths of poverty, the absence of social consideration, and the endurance of long drawn-out sufferings, right? If you're at the bottom of the social ladder, you're not going to be necessarily, I mean, you know that you're there, so there's not this problem of pride, there's not the temptation that you'd have, intellectual pride or something like that exists. But she's saying, you know, whoever works the fields, they're gonna end up with a body of somebody who works the fields. Whoever studies for a bunch of years is not necessarily going to end up with the intellectual habits that they need. Because
they have the choice of whether or not to attend.
Because you could study wrong.
So I think that goes to what Daphne was saying, where we could say that effort for effort's sake is maybe not persistence by itself, right? But effort in a deliberate way, in a balanced way. So just sitting and cramming your head against these French phrases for 15 hours is not going to get those French phrases to make sense. But if you put them in context and apply them in ways that your instructor is asking you to apply them, then it's no longer effort for effort's sake. There's a deliberateness there that's shaping it into the thing you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, at a certain point in my composition classes, I asked students about, I don't know, 6 weeks in or something, I have them do a reflection on their papers. And I tell them, please come up with concrete strategies of how you're going to improve your writing. So go back and look at all your feedback. Tell me what you're going to do. And I specifically tell them, you can't tell me that you're going to try harder. That's not a concrete strategy. So that to me is effort for effort's sake. I mean, that like if just trying harder was going to fix it, then you guys would all be excellent writers. That's not a concrete strategy. So it has to be specific, like I'm going to go to a tutor. You know what I mean? And I make them come up with a list of...
Or I'm going to read all my old test feedback.
I'm going to read all my... Yeah. So I make them, and then I turn up the heat. I tell them I'm holding you to these, meaning if you don't, if you said you're going to come to see me and you don't, I'm dinging your grade. I'm checking with the tutors, so you better. So, because I mean like that. But
This
that's...
is being filmed, I just wanted to say.
I know, that's fine. That's the difference between correct effort versus effort for effort's sake, though. I mean, I'll try harder. I'll put in more time. That's not going to equal learning.
I saw a poster with a whole bunch of bent nails, a 2x4, and it said, if you honestly believe you can make up for a lack of skill by redoubling your efforts, there's no limit to what you can't do.
Is that like a despair.com?
Yeah, yeah. Incompetence was the poster.
That's good.
There you go.
So I wonder if the theologian might want to weigh in a little bit on some of the things that were in here. You know,
Well-
yeah, just,
There's a lot here.
yeah,
That I see her and I say, you know, she's got the B understanding of virtue, not the A, but she's got the B understanding, which is good. You know, it's much better than your norm. But so what I try to
Can you
do.
point to a passage?
Sure. Let me go through a number of things that I think could have been. So she starts out, you know, what happened? What virtue are you really trying to find, right? We want to be able to have the virtue of attention, right? Being able to be focused, right? And so if you look at where this sets in the tradition, this is actually, you can find this in two different places. And one place that you'll find this is under the virtue of prudence. And here, let me come up here. So you'll find this under the virtue of prudence, right? And so where do we see prudence? Well, prudence is perfecting three different steps of the intellect. One, it perfects the step of counsel. What happens in counsel? This is where the person does their research and then they reason to a conclusion. So prudence is never about the end, it's about the means. You're figuring out how you're going to do something, right? Then it perfects judgment. So what's going on in judgment? What are you judging here? You're judging. You judge both by the intended end. In other words, what is the end you're intended? But you also judge by higher ends here, right? But then I'll give an example, more concrete in a second. Then the third thing is it perfects command. Prudence perfects your ability to command. All right, so we'll give a concrete example here. Let's take writing a good paper for Dr. Bowen, right? All right, and so the student has to sit down and do the research, right? What does she want? What are all the things I need to learn about? And what's the situation? What's the topic? How much time do I think I need? What did I do in the past? What do I do looking forward? All these different things. Then one of the parts of research is taking counsel from other people, right? What has Dr. Bowen told me to do, right? All these things are part of that. Then they reason, well, this is what I need to do. Then they judge, right? Because it recognizes, first, will this fulfill our intended of being a good paper? But then we're always part of a bigger world, aren't we? There's always other things going on in our lives. Will this help me, as she would say, get ultimately to God? Right? How does this fit into all the other classes I'm taking? Do I have time to do this, right? What's going on? Maybe my roommate's been in the hospital. Are there more important things I need to be doing, right? Does that make sense? You're judging them by higher ends. Then when you get to command, what are you doing on command? This is where the intellect commands the will to do the proper action. And command has two primary aspects. And one of them is focus, which I think is exactly what she means when she says attention, right? But notice how far this is down in the action, right? So this is a lot of what you're talking about over here, correct effort for effort's sake, so forth and so on. This assumes you've already done all of these other things before you get to this part. So there's two aspects of command. One is focused. This corresponds a fair amount to the Victorian English virtue of constancy. The person who's made a decision is made constant, fulfill what they do, right? And the second thing you're all constantly doing is you're constantly reevaluating the situation. So this is often referred to as caution in English. You're looking at the situation and you say, did this change? Because if the situation changes, because so often you make mistakes up here and what you think you're doing is not what you're really doing, and it ends up as worse than it actually what you envisioned. And if it's bad, then what you do, you go up here and you start over here. So focus then is part of the virtue of prudence, and it's something you have to practice. You've got to practice focus, you've got to practice focus, but you can practice focusing on the wrong things. You completely practice focusing on the wrong things. But then secondly, when you talk about the growth of virtue, there are various different stages. And I like to break it up into 4 stages. When you have your very beginner, so we'll just draw a graph here because it's a good visual way to do it. And you have your beginner, so on this side here is growth and virtue. On this side, growth and virtue. Down here you have a repetition of actions. And, well, you'll see it's more complex than just that, but that's good enough for now. Right? When you have your beginner, this person only does the good acts. So does the good only with the aid of others. They only do the good act because somebody else is making them do it. Right? But this is right. This is for your grades. But for a lot of our students, they're here. They'll only do it because we're making them do it. And this is when you're training your children to grow up. They don't clean the room unless you make them clean the room. But when they do this over and over and over and over again, if they have at least a little goodwill at all, like I said, it's a little more complex, or they get to the second level. Now they can in a sense force themselves to do the good. And when I say force themselves to do the good, what are they doing? They're overcoming contrary emotions. So what's going on here is, this is the part where she says willpower alone isn't going to do it. Well, if you're in this stage, willpower alone is what it's all about. This is when they don't want to do their homework, but they do it anyway because they force themselves to do it. Right? But then after you continue to grow, do the action over and over, you've got to have a good will when you're doing this, but you continue this, you finally get to the third stage. And in the third stage, this is where you initially have, you have contrary emotions, but now you've gotten to the point where you've trained your emotions, but can now control the emotions and transform them. So when I say control, I don't just mean you overcome them. What can you do now? This is like you're angry at someone, and then you think about it. Yeah, I really shouldn't be angry at that person. And you calm your anger down. But if you're down here, you're doing the right thing, but you're still angry as heck. And if you're here, you only do the right thing because someone's holding you back. Right? But none of these are virtue yet, right?
Is that third level habit, or are we not there yet?
Well, you're increasing your habit, growth of virtue. So your habit's getting stronger and stronger and stronger with each one. But for full-fledged virtue, this is where you simply desire the good, right? The intellect, the will, the emotions are all on the same page here, right? And so she wants you to be up in these categories, right? Once you get here, once you get to these categories, it's not enough just to continue repetition of action. You have to increase the intensity. You have to increase the intensity of the action itself in order to continue to grow. So if we use an example from the essay, like your own prayer life, you've got the first person, the very lowest stage, they only pray because their parents make them to. Now they don't like to pray, but they do it because they know God wants them to pray, right? Now, initially, I'd rather be doing something else, but I do enjoy praying, right? This is where a lot of your Benedictine students are, right? I do enjoy it, I'm going to go and do it. Here's where they just simply desire to. They just want to pray. But once you get here, to keep going, you have to increase the intensity of the action itself. Repetition won't be enough.
Now,
yes.
On her thing, I mean, I think there's a way in which we can understand intention as focus on that understanding of it. But we can also understand attention. There's a concomitant attention that's needed for all of those steps, right? Because if you don't have an awareness that you need to do the research, if you don't have the reflection in order to identify the intended end or the higher ends. But I do on this chart, I think that forcing themselves to do the good and overcoming contrary emotions might not be enough if you're forcing yourself to do it but not do it well. Because there's a little bit of, I'm just going to this is what I see on a lot of assignments, I'm just going to get this thing over with.
Right.
Which is not the same thing as doing it well. So I think some of the attention that she's talking about is precisely that type of intensity, the spiritual intensity with which you are doing it, the presence of yourself and the presence of mind that you need in order to do the thing so that it has a long-lasting effect.
pitching
Right, I won't disagree with that, right? You get to the point where you've got to keep increasing the intensity, but the idea here is generally, just to do it is as good as you can get, right? As you move up, so this is what I think's going on here. She's talking about you got to keep increasing the intensity of the action. And that's what all of you do as teachers, right? You increase the intensity of this subject matter every single day as you go through the class, right? It's not just enough for them to do beginning biology over and over and over again. You got to keep increasing the intensity. But when you think intensity, usually we're talking about three things. One is focus. The second one is love of the will. And the third one is passion and the emotions. All three of these are there.
Now you're actually kind of hitting the thing I was hoping you would talk about. So can I kind of pick this
absolutely.
kind of in order here? So this is the one I was really hoping you'd bring up.
Right.
We're going to get to that last though. Can we talk about this first?
Yeah, absolutely.
So okay, so this graph, everybody sort of followed him through what he was saying with this graph here, right? And I think that this is sort of what we see kind of being described at the bottom of page 58, the last full paragraph. So certainties of this kind are experimental, but if we do not believe in them before experiencing them, if we at least do not behave as though we believe them, we shall never have the experience that leads to such certainties. There is a kind of contradiction here. Above given level, this is the case with all useful knowledge concerning spiritual progress. If we do not regulate our conduct by it before having proved it, if we do not hold on to it for a long time by faith alone, the faith that first stormed in without light, we shall never transform it into certainty. Faith is the indispensable condition. So do you think she's trying to describe this, right?
She is. That's what's going on.
She's getting a lot of it right.
Right. You start down. You're starting down here, right? You do it because somebody with virtue, who has virtue in their life, is making you do it or giving you the ideas to do it, things like that. But you get here if you keep going. And to do it, you got to keep increasing the intensity. So one last thing, real quick though. So this is a lot.
You're not done yet.
Okay. So this is a lot like Saint Therese of Lisieux, right? Do little things with great love, right? But what she really means, Saint Therese just means do little things with great intensity. Stay focused, have passion in your emotions, and love a whole lot in everything you're doing. And that's very similar to what she's talking about here, isn't it?
I mean, I think attention and intensity have the same etymology. Right? That you're holding course for something, right? You're stretching toward something.
Both have to do with tension.
Yeah, that's right.
Tend and intend.
Yeah, well, I didn't think about that, but that's true.
So again, I want to do this last
Sure,
because I
sure,
think there's a lot we can talk
absolutely,
about here. But I want to ask you, and anybody else who thinks they might have a kind of an insight on this. You wrote focus here, and you sort of showed how it fits in with prudence.
Right.
And it sort of seems like that's what she is talking about with attention, but there's a lot of things going on here. One thing that she says is that with our studies, we're trying to hone a kind of earthly attention, and it's different from the attention in prayer. And so do you think this is exactly one of those two that she's talking about, or just closely related to one of them?
Well, right, so her idea, ultimately what's going on here is she recognizes that we have an ordered world and all of our actions are ordered towards higher ends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the way that, and it's a lot like the way that you would approach your wife is different than the way that you would approach whatever else.
Anyone who's not my wife.
Yeah, precisely, right? And so consequently, that's the case with prudence. It's recognizing that you have different ends and different goals and a different way of attaining these. And I think that's what's going on. But in all cases, whether you're dealing with your wife or anyone else, you need to be able to focus on your action. For your studies, you've got to be able to focus. And that's, I think, in many ways what's going on here. And then she would say, well, it would be something like this, right? Her ultimate goal ultimately would be God, right? You know, and whatever she's doing. And then, so study is ultimately ordered. There may be lots of intermediary things in between here, but at the end of the day, why are you studying? Because you're learning about God. You're loving God.
Did you have a point there?
There's a complimentary text that talks about the TED Talk on Grit that Angela Duckworth that love of the will and that passion and the emotions, those are the two elements that she has of grit. One's passion and then one's perseverance. And, I mean, it might be something that, you know, because it's been a bestseller for the last few years, and I don't know if schools are talking about it yet at the high school level or whatever. I mean, she tried to do this study on why certain people, you know, persevere while other people
Sure,
don't.
sure.
And it's not a question of smarts,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of it is those two things, right? You could take the little test.
So let me ask you, John, you said at the beginning, you give her a B for understanding of virtue. And yet when we're talking about it, you're talking about her being at every one of those four
Yeah,
levels.
because it's the way she says some things, though. Like, at certain times, she'll say, it's not about, it misses the complexity, I guess you'd say, the way she explains it. Like she says at times, it's not about focus of will. Well, at some places it is. In other places, it's not. You know, it's,
So consistency, you think is something.
right.
In her way.
That's what I mean, that's right. Yeah, I know, I agree with her overall goal here, right? We're on the same page, I'm just trying to fill in a few gaps.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So she talks about persistence in good ways, and she talks about this kind of like blind effort in bad ways, right? Grit. You mentioned grit. You're talking about a different thing, but let's talk about grit. She actually makes a reference to someone who had a lot of grit also. And here she says that the
Curious.
Courtars, right? Courtars. I don't remember exactly what was written in here.
Page 59.
59.
The useful efforts made by the Curiars.
Right.
Oh, sure, he couldn't learn Latin, right? And so,
Oh,
but that
two-
translates.
right.
Yeah.
So this is a famous priest who tried to learn Latin. Had a lot of grit and never learned Latin, I think. But
Do you want me to tell the story?
So you can tell the story.
All right, so he was a priest in the 1800s in France. So he was studying actually at the time of the French Revolution, which gives you an idea of the time frame. And he wanted to be a priest. But at the time, you had to learn Latin, of course, because the Mass is in Latin, right? And all of your books, your textbooks are in Latin, right? And couldn't learn it. They finally ordained him as a priest with the dispensation that at least initially he's not allowed to hear confessions. You might ask, well, why is that the case? Because at the time, the way that you primarily heard confessions is you had a manual, and a manual basically of sins, and with the sins you had the penances that went with the particular sins, right? And if you aren't able to read the Latin, you can't give the right penances. Right? Now this assumes that people are always in this stage and never get out. Right? So keep this in mind. This is a very deontological understanding of morality, and it was not particularly good. But so they eventually ordained him, but years he struggled with this. Well, of course, later on he's famous for spending 18 hours a day in the confessional, and he's not there because he just wants to hide out. He has a line of people coming all the time. This means 100,000 people a year would come from all over Europe just to hear confessions from him, because he was such a good confessor. And he also had the gift of God of understanding hearts, so he often would know the sins you commit without you telling them to him, and he had these kind of spiritual insights. So you would call him a mystic as well. He's not usually referred to that as, but that's really what he was. He was a particular mystic, and he understood the mystic inside people's hearts. But yeah, her point is, he learned focus. He could never do Latin, but he understood focus, so he could spend 18 hours a day in the confessional, and he was focused. And that was a skill. That's a virtue. It's under part of his prudence.
By the way, as an economist, when he drew that curve, I thought, oh, that's great. Learning virtue and so on isn't subject to diminishing returns. In fact, it's increasing returns.
There's not even an inflection point.
We're just going up that way instead of up at the diminishing rate.
But the reality of a lot of people are kind of like this.
Yeah.
Nobody is like this in reality.
Okay, so there were my hopes are dead.
That's the ideal person.
Dash against those rocks.
But the thing about virtues is every contrary act decreases it.
So since we have just a little bit of, and this was only a few times, but there were strong statements about warmth of heart and at the beginning
Yeah,
and at the
that's
end
right.
of the reading. So I think that we should probably talk about that before we run out of time. Did any of you have any kind of thoughts about, should I read the passages or you know what I'm talking about?
Well, I know one, it might not be the same one you're
Go for it.
looking at.
Go for it.
Looking at page 61, in the middle of the second paragraph, intelligence can only be led by desire. For there to be desire, there must be pleasure and joy in the work. Is that the kind of emotion
Yeah,
you're talking
yep,
about?
that's part of it. Yep.
And by desire, I think she means both love of the will and passions of love. She's not making this distinction strong.
Uh-huh.
Because you're loving God when you do these things.
So do we think that's true? Did you start reading it there, for there to be desire, there must be pleasure, was that part you read? Enjoying the work? So the intelligence only grows and bears fruit and joy. Do we think that's true?
I think there's a way that a student can misunderstand that, right? Because you're not going to be in love with the subject every single day,
Right.
and you might take certain classes that you have to force yourself to do, but you still want to be a biologist, right? Or you want to be a doctor, you want to serve others, and this is where I go put the commitment to service, right? Because if you realize, I mean, why didn't he just give up? Because he wanted to be a priest and serve souls, right? And this was a very difficult hurdle for him, and he didn't give up because there was maybe not necessarily a love of that particular language, but there was a love of the final goal that this was a stepping stone toward. And so I think if you look at that and say, well, I'm not learning well because I'm not loving this, because I don't like differential equations. But if you have a love for the kind of person that you're going to be for others once you get over this hurdle, right? Then I think that, there's a joy there, because this idea that joy and pain cannot coexist, I think, is a modern, a modern lie.
I'm going to add one word to what you said, that they're sort of driven by, I want to be a biologist. I want to be a good biologist, right? I want to not just get that degree and get the job. I want to be the one who can solve those problems that need to be solved in biology.
Right.
Yeah.
Going back to the warmth of heart thing, though, it's definitely in where I think you're referring to it at the beginning, especially, is that she's saying warmth of heart is not enough, and in fact might be deceptive. And maybe this goes back to the biographical information you gave us about her. She loved math, but maybe realized that love wasn't really her calling, but perhaps an avocation, and that she could do the best good by pursuing something like philosophy, where maybe she wasn't as entertained by it, or it wasn't that warmth and sort of the hobby part of it, but that it would be better for her.
Right.
At the very end, when she says academic work is one of those fields containing a pearl so precious that it's worth to sell all our possessions, everything, in order to acquire it, but she doesn't hammer home the point of what it is, but what she says above is, the love of our neighbor and understanding that, and then at their moment of most need, we recognize that and we can say the right thing. I mean, is that empathy, or, but that's not book knowledge. That's being able to read other people's pain and suffering, and you putting yourselves in their shoes, and then having the wisdom to say the right thing to help them with their affliction. I mean, is that it that we're supposed to get from studies?
I think she relates it back to this attention and the idea that if you can attend to something with the patience that it requires, and the willingness to disengage from your own thoughts, your preconceived thoughts about it, then you can also engage with someone in suffering and not try to give them what you think is right, but to
And not preach to them.
Right, but to then be open to what will be right for them.
Most importantly, attend to God and to God's will for you and how you're going to live your life. See, you know, we talked about the door earlier. One of the most important things is before, the step before it is, where's the door? You know, like that's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, where is the door for it? So you have to be attentive to your life and to your own basic needs, and to the fact that wherever your most basic, deepest needs are, you're going to find the door somewhere in there, right? And then on the other side of the door, if you can pull it, you can find, you know, God and God's help, you know, grace and so on. But you have to be attentive to everybody.
So, I'm just gonna throw out a few things that aren't related so much to the text, and then ask John to kind of wrap up for us his thoughts on whether warmth of heart makes up for, warmth of heart stuff. So just, since this is the last discussion that you're gonna have with your class, I thought I would just point out some things that you might ask them about, or might talk to them about, or just kind of like fun connections you can make sort of at the end. So, in my opinion, this was a really good, it's a really good wrap-up text, good for recollection, because you can tie a lot of, because there's a lot in it, you can tie it back to, I think, other habits of mind that we covered in the semester. And so, for example, there's some stuff in here that talks about all these different things that are true as being something that accesses, you know, the one truth. And so that ties back to the things that Julie told us when she drew the diagram with truth in the middle and the circle around it. I didn't just invent this in my mind, right?
No, I remember.
We all remember the circle.
Yeah.
So it might be interesting.
Liberal arts.
Just something I'm planning on doing next semester is I will probably ask my students to wrap up a little bit by trying to see if they can find any connections between the kinds of virtues that are hidden in this paper and the kinds of virtues that we've already been talking about throughout the semester. And also, it may be somewhat fun to give the famous Thomas Edison quote, because I think that it really has the same kind of spirit. The number's always different. Every time it's quoted, it's a different number.
Inspiration, perspiration.
But I didn't, well, I didn't fail 1,000 times to invent a light bulb. I proved that those 1,000 ways don't work and then eventually found one that does, right? Very closely, I mean, it's kind of an interesting
Right, and that was
science connection.
Yeah.
and that would go very well with her talking about the value of doing something wrong.
Right, the value of doing something wrong.
That's Churchill's quote too, going from failure to failure without any loss of enthusiasm.
I didn't know that one.
Going from
Churchill.
failure
That's
to
Churchill.
Going from failure to failure without any loss of enthusiasm.
And as an opposing view, I think Eddie started to mention 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration.
Yeah, that.
The quote that, yeah,
Well, it's that
that's also related, right?
if you don't have that, you don't discover 1,000 ways not to make a light.
Right, exactly. So, and also, this I think is a really good quote for the attention and the part where she's talking about, you know, like the Holy Grail kind of story she tells, where you have to walk up to this person and ask, what are you going through? She has a quote from one of her other works that it's a really nice quote. It's every being cries out silently to be read differently. To be read differently, yeah. I just thought that was I didn't actually read this quote because I was reading one of her other works. It was because I was reading the transcript from a talk that was given at a math conference, and the guy just kept quoting Simone Weil left and right because people outside of philosophy just love her too. So anyway, but we have a couple minutes, like 2 minutes left, so could you maybe give us a final note on the warmth of heart?
Yeah, I think I'll say just a couple things. I do want to point out that the teacher does different things to increase the virtue of the student in all of these, wherever they are, right? And so the problem, of course, is in your classrooms, you have people here and you have people here, don't you? And you have to treat them all differently. These, you just got to make them do it. But these people, it's more about encouragement and increasing the intensity and helping them get better, things like that, as they go out here. Right, so let's go back to this notion of love of the passions and joy. And Eddie's point is the students are not always going to enjoy, right? Especially if they're down here, they may not like it at all. But it might be very good for them. And that is, so ultimately, we're going to make this real simplistic, but she might say, why are you ultimately studying? You're studying ultimately so you can learn. Why are you going to learn? Because you're going to ultimately love and help others. And why are you ultimately going to do this? You're going to ultimately do this, for God. So we'll learn a subject, right? This would be the order of the going up. These are your higher goals that you're ordering to. But the goodness of God comes down. All of these are good in and of themselves, too. Mm-hmm. And so getting your students to figure out which one of these to love, what will bring the passion is part of the job. It might not be the subject that brings the passion, but it might be loving others. And it might be God, somewhere along the way. And occasionally you'll have students that are hard to find on that completely. But then hopefully, if you can get them to at least love this, but ideally, you can get them to become more passionate about it. But passion is hard to keep going all the time. That's part of growing in virtue. So, anyway.